Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi stunned a national television audience when she referenced Pope Robert Prevost during what was supposed to be a routine political interview. What began as standard commentary on current events took an unexpected turn when the host challenged her faith-based perspective. But when Bondi revealed a deeply personal connection to the new pope's work in Peru, even the most hardened political commentators in the studio fell silent, with many visibly moved to tears. The moment transcended political divisions and touched on something far more universal, a truth about human dignity that no one saw coming. If you value stories that cut through political noise to reveal our shared humanity, please like and subscribe for more content that highlights these powerful moments of connection across divides. Pam Bondi had been making the rounds on news programs to discuss her recent appointment to a presidential commission on law enforcement. As Florida's former attorney general and a seasoned prosecutor, she had built a reputation as a sharp legal mind with strong conservative values. But today's appearance on National Focus, a morning show known for its combative interview style, was never going to be a friendly exchange. The program's host, Marcus Winters, had established himself as a formidable interviewer who prided himself on challenging political figures from both sides of the aisle. His direct, often aggressive questioning had made National Focus required viewing for political insiders, though critics argued his approach contributed to the increasingly polarized national discourse. Bondi arrived at the studio 30 minutes before airtime. She had spent the previous evening reviewing likely questions with her team, preparing responses on everything from immigration policy to election security. The show's producers had indicated they would focus on her commission work and perhaps touch on current Supreme Court cases. What Bondi didn't reveal to her prep team was the small silver medallion she carried in her pocket, a keepsake from a deeply personal experience in Peru 15 years earlier that had profoundly shaped her worldview, though she rarely spoke about it publicly. The medallion had been given to her by then Bishop Robert Prevost, who had recently been appointed as Pope following the unexpected resignation of his predecessor. As she waited in the green room, Bondi could hear Winters conducting a typically confrontational interview with a Democratic senator. The exchange was heated, with Winters repeatedly interrupting and challenging the senator's statements. This was standard procedure on National Focus, where policy discussions quickly devolved into verbal sparring matches designed more for ratings than illumination. "We're with former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi in 3 minutes," a production assistant announced, handing Bondi a bottle of water. Bondi nodded, knowing what awaited her on set. The stakes of this appearance extended beyond promoting her commission work. In today's hyper-polarized climate, any misstep or emotional reaction could be clipped, stripped of context, and circulated endlessly online. Public figures like her were perpetually one sentence away from a career-defining moment, for better or worse. When the assistant returned to escort her to the set, Bondi touched the medallion in her pocket briefly. She hadn't planned to discuss her faith or personal experiences on air. These matters were private and often weaponized in political contexts. But sometimes, she reflected, the most important things weren't planned at all. The studio lights were blindingly bright as she took her seat across from Winters. Behind his practiced smile, she could see the calculated look in his eyes. He wasn't interested in a discussion. He was hunting for a moment, a gaffe, an overreaction, anything that would drive engagement and controversy. "We're live in 5, 4, 3. Floor director counted down silently with his fingers. Winters turned to the camera with practiced precision. "We're back with former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, recently appointed to the President's Commission on Law Enforcement. Attorney General Bondi, welcome to National Focus." What happened next would transform a routine political interview into something neither Winters, the studio audience, nor the millions watching at home had anticipated. A rare moment of authentic, human connection that would transcend the political boundaries that typically defined such exchanges. The interview began predictably enough. Winters opened with questions about Bondi's commission appointment, pressing her on controversial police, tactics and reform measures. Bondi responded with the measured composure typical of seasoned political figures, neither revealing too much nor appearing evasive. Your commission has been criticized as being too deferential to law enforcement interests, Winters challenged, leaning forward. Critics suggest you're not serious about addressing systemic issues. How do you respond? The commission includes diverse perspectives, Marcus, Bondi replied. Our goal isn't to protect institutions, but to strengthen communities through balanced approaches to public safety. This exchange continued for several minutes, Winters pushing, Bondi responding diplomatically. The interview was proceeding along familiar lines, neither particularly noteworthy nor contentious by the show's standards. Viewers at home might have been checking their phones or preparing for their day, expecting nothing unprecedented from this segment. Then came the pivot that would change everything. Let's talk about your recent comments on immigration policy, Winters said, his tone sharpening. You suggested that faith-based principles should inform our approach to border security. Isn't that imposing religious values on policy matters? Bondi paused briefly. I believe human dignity should be central to all policy discussions. That perspective aligns with my faith, yes, but it's a universal principle that transcends religious boundaries. Winters sensed an opening. But not everyone shares your religious framework. The new Pope, Robert Prevost, comes from a very different background than previous pontiffs. He's emphasized a more progressive approach to social issues. Doesn't that undermine conservative religious arguments on immigration? The mention of Pope Prevost's name caused a subtle but noticeable change in Bondi's demeanor. She touched her jacket pocket lightly, where the medallion rested. Actually, Marcus, I've had the privilege of meeting Robert Prevost long before he became Pope. Her voice took on a quality that seasoned interviewers recognize immediately. The sound of someone moving from scripted talking points to personal truth. Winters, sensing a potential moment, leaned in slightly. You've met the new Pope? 15 years ago in Peru, Bondi continued. Few people know this, but I spent 3 weeks there following a personal crisis in my life. My brother had died unexpectedly, and I was questioning everything. My career, my purpose, my faith. The studio grew noticeably quieter. This was not the political sparring the audience had expected. I visited a mission in Lima where then Bishop Prevost was working. I didn't go seeking spiritual guidance. I was there as part of a legal advisory team helping with adoption regulations. But I was clearly struggling. Bondi's voice remained steady, but her eyes revealed the emotional weight of the memory. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, I was sitting alone in the mission's courtyard. Bishop Prevost found me there. He didn't know who I was professionally, just that I was someone in pain. He sat with me for hours, listening as I poured out my grief and doubt. Winters, trained to interrupt and challenge, remained uncharacteristically silent. What struck me was that he never once tried to convert my pain into a theological lesson. He simply acknowledged it as real and worthy of witness. When you're suffering, that recognition means everything. The camera operator, sensing the significance of the moment, tightened the frame on Bondi's face. In the control room, the director made the unusual decision to stay with this single shot, rather than cutting between perspectives. The next day, Bishop Prevost invited me to join a community outreach program in one of Lima's poorest neighborhoods. I watched as he navigated between government officials, local community leaders, and families in crisis, never changing his approach regardless of someone's status or power. Bondi reached into her pocket and withdrew the small silver medallion, holding it up for the camera. He gave me this before I left. It's a medal of St. Thomas More, the patron saint of politicians and lawyers. Bishop Prevost told me, remember that your work isn't about power, it's about people. When the two conflict, choose people. At this point, the interview had completely transformed. What had begun as a typical political exchange was now something else entirely, a genuine human moment unfolding on live television. So when you ask me about Pope Prevost's approach to social issues, Bondi continued, her voice growing stronger, I don't think in terms of progressive or conservative frameworks. What I witnessed in him was something more fundamental, a commitment to human dignity that defies political categorization. The tension in the studio was palpable, not from conflict, but from the rare authenticity breaking through the polished veneer of political discourse. Several production assistants were visibly moved. Even Winters, a veteran interviewer known for his emotional detachment, seemed affected by Bondi's unexpected vulnerability. But the most powerful moment was yet to come, a revelation about Pope Prevost's work in Peru that would connect deeply with viewers across political spectrums and bring many to tears. Marcus Winters, recognizing that something extraordinary was happening, made a decision unusual for his interviewing style. He simply asked, "What did you see him do in Peru that stayed with you?" Bondi looked directly at Winters, her political persona completely shed. "I witnessed something I've never spoken about publicly. It's shaped every decision I've made since, though few would connect my policies to this experience." She took a breath before continuing. Bishop Prevost had established a reconciliation program in a region torn apart by political violence. Former enemies, people whose families had killed each other during the conflicts of the 1980s and 90s, were brought together in a community rebuilding project. The studio was completely silent now. Even the typically restless camera operators and production assistants stood motionless. One day, a mother confronted the man who had killed her son during the violence. Everyone expected rage, perhaps even violence. Instead, after an excruciating silence, she asked him to help her rebuild her son's school, which had been destroyed in the conflict. Bondi's voice remained steady, but tears had formed in her eyes. Bishop Prevost had created a framework where justice and mercy could exist together, where accountability didn't preclude redemption. The man worked alongside the mother for 2 years. I watched their relationship transform from blinding hatred to something I can only describe as sacred recognition of each other's humanity. At this point, several people in the studio were openly crying. A production assistant quickly wiped tears from her cheeks. Even Winters, known for his unflappable demeanor, appeared moved. "The final day I was there," Bondi continued, "I witnessed the opening ceremony for the completed school. The mother spoke publicly for the first time about her journey from vengeance to reconciliation. She said something I've carried with me every day since. Justice without the possibility of redemption is just another form of violence." Bondi held up the medallion again. "When Bishop Prevost gave me this, he told me that power, whether in church, government, or any institution, exists to serve this possibility of transformation. Not to punish endlessly, not to divide people into worthy and unworthy, but to create conditions where broken things can be made whole again." The camera caught a tear rolling down Bondi's cheek, but her voice never wavered. "What makes me emotional isn't just the memory. It's knowing that the man who showed me this vision of justice is now Pope. Someone who understands that the deepest political and spiritual questions aren't abstract, but embodied in how we treat each other in our most wounded moments." What happened next stunned everyone in the studio. Marcus Winters, the interviewer known for never revealing his personal thoughts, said quietly, "My brother died from addiction 3 years ago. I've been angry at the system, at him, at everything. What you're describing, that's what I've been looking for. Some way to make meaning without erasing the loss." The camera, which should have cut away from this breach of journalistic convention, stayed fixed on Winters' face. The director, sensing the unprecedented nature of the moment, let it unfold. "That's why Pope Prevost matters beyond religious boundaries," Bondi said gently. "He represents something we're all hungry for, the possibility that our deepest wounds might be the foundation for a more humane world rather than reasons to further entrench our divisions." The control room producer, through Winters' earpiece, indicated they should go to commercial. Winters, in an extraordinary moment of defiance, removed the earpiece. "We need to hear this," he said, addressing not just Bondi but the viewers. Not as Democrats or Republicans, but as people trying to make sense of a broken world. Bondi reached across the table, another breach of the invisible barrier between interviewer and subject, and briefly touched Winters' hand. "Bishop Prevost, Pope Prevost now, showed me that the most powerful response to suffering isn't policy or ideology. It's presence. Simply being willing to stand with people in their pain without trying to explain it away or exploit it." The camera pulled back to reveal that nearly everyone in the studio was weeping openly. The artifice of television production had completely fallen away, replaced by a moment of genuine human connection. In television terms, this was the triumph, not of Bondi over Winters or vice versa, but of authentic human connection over the performative nature of political discourse. What had been exposed was not scandal or contradiction, but the universal hunger for meaning and reconciliation that transcends political identity. And as the segment finally cut to commercial, several minutes later than scheduled, social media was already exploding with reactions from viewers witnessing something they'd never expected. A political interview that had become a moment of collective emotional catharsis. The impact of Bondi's interview was immediate and profound. Within hours, the segment had been viewed millions of times across social media platforms. Bondi Prevost moment began trending nationally, with viewers from across the political spectrum sharing how the exchange had affected them. Marcus Winter's network, initially concerned about his unprecedented breach of journalistic distance, quickly recognized the value of what had transpired. The full, unedited interview was rebroadcast in prime time that evening, drawing the highest ratings in the network's history for a news program. Media analysts struggled to categorize what had happened. Was it a political interview, a spiritual testimony, or something entirely new? The moment seemed to defy the usual frameworks of media criticism. For Pam Bondi, the aftermath brought both opportunity and challenge. Invitations for speaking engagements flooded in, not just from conservative political organizations, but from universities, interfaith groups, and international peace-building initiatives. The medallion she had shown on air became a symbol referenced in discussions about justice reform and reconciliation politics. 3 days after the interview, Bondi received a personal phone call from Pope Prevost himself. "Your words honored the people of Peru more than they honored me," he told her. "Thank you for remembering them." Their conversation, which lasted nearly an hour, renewed their connection and led to an invitation for Bondi to participate in a Vatican conference on restorative justice the following year, an invitation she immediately accepted. Marcus Winters experienced his own transformation in the wake of the interview. His public acknowledgement of his brother's death and his own grief opened something in him and his approach to journalism. While maintaining his incisive interviewing style, he incorporated a new segment into his program called Common Ground, exploring issues from perspectives that transcended partisan frameworks. "The Bondi interview taught me something essential about my profession," Winters explained in a subsequent interview. "We've become so focused on conflict as the driver of engagement that we've neglected the equally powerful human desire for connection and meaning." Perhaps most significantly, the interview sparked a broader conversation about the role of personal experience in political formation. Political scientists noted an uptick in public figures sharing formative experiences that shaped their policy perspectives, moving beyond the abstraction of ideology to the concrete realities that informed their worldviews. A month after the interview, Bondi published an essay detailing more of her experience in Peru and how it had shaped her approach to criminal justice reform, positions that had sometimes puzzled her political allies. The essay revealed how her seemingly tough-on-crime stance contained nuances informed by what she had witnessed in Peru. Accountability coupled with pathways to redemption. For many viewers, the most lasting impact came from witnessing vulnerability from public figures typically ensconced in carefully constructed personas. The sight of both Bondi and Winters momentarily setting aside their professional roles to connect as human beings affected people deeply in an era of increasing polarization. "I've disagreed with Pam Bondi on virtually every policy position," one prominent liberal commentator wrote. "But watching that interview reminded me that behind political disagreements are human beings shaped by experiences I know nothing about. That doesn't change my positions, but it changes how I understand those who hold different ones." 6 months later, the Vatican announced that Pope Prevost would be expanding the reconciliation program, first piloted in Peru, to other regions experiencing political violence and division. The announcement specifically credited greater awareness of the Peruvian experience as catalyzing international support for the initiative, a direct reference to the impact of Bondi's interview. For the production team at National Focus, the legacy of the interview was bittersweet. The unscripted human moment had generated unprecedented engagement, yet it could not be manufactured or replicated. It stood as evidence that authentic human connection, even more than conflict or controversy, was what audiences ultimately hungered for. A year after the interview, Bondi and Winters appeared together at a conference on media and civic dialogue. Their unlikely friendship, born from a moment of shared vulnerability, embodied the possibility of connection across difference that Pope Prevost had demonstrated in Peru years earlier. What happened that day wasn't about politics or religion, Bondi reflected during the conference. It was about the universal experience of suffering and the human capacity for transformation. Pope Prevost showed me this in Peru, and somehow, in that studio with Marcus, we managed to share it with others. The most profound testament to the interview's impact came in thousands of letters and messages from ordinary viewers who described watching the segment multiple times, often with family members from whom they had become estranged over political differences. Many reported that the interview had opened conversations previously thought impossible, creating space for recognition of shared humanity across seemingly unbridgeable divides. As one viewer wrote, "I watched with my father, who I haven't really talked to in years because of politics. When you both started crying, something broke open between us too. We still disagree about almost everything, but for the first time in a long time, I remembered that he's a person first, not just a collection of opinions I oppose." In an era defined by division, the unexpected moment when Pam Bondi mentioned Pope Robert Prevost had created a rare glimpse of what might be possible if we approached our deepest wounds not as reasons for further separation, but as invitations to a more profound connection. If you found value in this story about finding common humanity across divides, please like and subscribe for more content that highlights these moments of connection. Share in the comments how you've experienced transformation through unexpected encounters in your own life.